Hi there, and welcome to the rebroadcast of SmartPak's free webinar, Blanketing Uncovered. I'm Sarah Paul, SmartPak's brand manager, and I was also the presenter at Equine Affair, Massachusetts, where this video was originally filmed. I'm sorry you couldn't join us for the live Q&A during the airing of the original video. However, we do have a transcript of all the questions and answers listed below. If you have a question about your particular horse or any supplement questions, anything else we can help you with, you're always welcome to reach out to our experts at 1-888-752-5171 or email customercare@smartpak.com. Thanks again for joining us and enjoy the presentation. Hi guys, thanks very much for coming out. I know the microphone system's a little bit tough, so if you guys feel like you can't really hear that well, give me a shout. We can try it without. I am quite loud. So just let me know and we'll go from there. So I think the introduction was kind of perfect. Today's weather is really exactly what you're dealing with when you're in life in the barn in the winter and it's blustery and this isn't even really winter yet. So we all know what we're in for. And so there's kind of a lot of different ways that you can really start to talk about blankets or horse clothing. But I'm going to go ahead and get started with the one that applies to just about everyone in the room, and that's winter riding. And winter riding presents some unique challenges, and I don't just mean ice sliding off the roof of the indoor while your horse runs around without you. There's things like warming up takes longer, cooling down takes a lot longer, and if you don't cool your horse out properly, you can end up having a lot of chill and trapped moisture that can cause a lot of problems for you. So cooling out is one of the first places that horse clothing comes in really handy. And if you've ever ridden at a barn with more than 5 horses, you've probably watched in the indoor in the winter, everybody's riding around, and some people look like they're riding in fleece coolers, some people look like they're riding in wool coolers, some people look like they might just be covering their horse with a towel, and that's okay, I won't judge. But there's definitely different types of horse clothing, different types of fabrics and materials that can make it better or worse for your horse for winter ride cooling out. A lot of people tend to think of wool as the first material that you want to use to keep your horse warm and dry. And while wool is really absorbent, it doesn't dry very quickly. And so if you're going to cool your horse out for 15 minutes and then let him stand in the aisle and dry off, he is going to have the heat retained underneath that wool blanket, but that blanket's really going to hold that moisture, and that's not going to help him dry as effectively as you need. So that's going to take a lot longer for you and not really be very productive. One of the other materials that people tend to think about as being really helpful for cooling the horse out is some of the synthetic fabrics or the technical fabrics. And those are really, really great, and we've seen a lot of advancements in terms of coolers and things like that, but those are more for warmer weather riding, because while they wick the moisture away really quickly and they'll really speed up that drying process, they're not going to keep your horse very warm. And so that's definitely going to become a little bit of an issue for you when he dries out quickly, but doesn't stay as warm as you'd want him to. So that's a little bit of a challenge there. So if you don't want wool and you don't want synthetics, another material that people are pretty familiar with is cotton. Going back to the wool, cotton is super absorbent, and it will, like most natural fibers, it'll really absorb that water and pull it right away from your horse. But again, similar to wool, cotton's going to tend to hold that water. Think of your towel after you get out of the shower. It dries you off really well, but then 5 hours later you pick it up because you realized you left it on the floor of your bedroom, and you pick it up, hang it up, and it's still wet. And so that's not going to help your horse really dry thoroughly. So the last material that leaves us with for winter riding cooling out is fleece. And fleece is actually really kind of the ideal fabric that you want to be using for cooling out after winter rides. We have one of our fleece coolers here today, and you can see this is a really lightweight fabric. You guys are welcome at any time to come up and touch and feel these things. You're welcome to come up and ask questions about them. And shameless plug, we do have all of these blankets for sale at the SmartPak booth in the Better Living Center. And so this fleece blanket is really great because it's super lightweight. It's really instead of being absorbent like cotton and wool, it pulls the moisture away and transfers it to the outside of the fabric where it then dries off. Fleece also does really help your horse retain the body heat. So unlike the synthetics, which pull the moisture away, and leave him chilly, this pulls the moisture away and lets him keep himself warm. So fleece is a really great product. When it comes to buying a fleece cooler though, you're going to find you have a lot of options. There are shaped coolers, or also known as quarter sheets. You can get a standard cooler, which looks basically like your horse's stable sheet or stable blanket. Or you can get a square cooler, which is the one that looks like a big, just giant square, like a bed sheet. And so any of those styles in a fleece material would be great for your horse, and the different styles have different advantages. Quarter sheets are really nice because you can actually buckle them under the flaps of your saddle and ride with them. If you're only going for a short trail ride, or if you just want to go out for a little bit of a hack, you can keep that quarter sheet over your horse's haunches, and that'll help keep his back muscles really nice and warm, and so you don't have to worry about having a lot of tension in his back while he's chilly. If you are like me and you have a lot going on and you can barely get to the barn after work and you can barely get home after you ride and then you forget that you didn't have dinner, one of the great coolers that I love to use is a standard cooler, and that's what we've got right here. The standard coolers are nice because they have buckles in the front and they have a belly surcingle. And so as you guys can see, they have a full front buckle and the belly surcingle. And that's a really big benefit because then I can cool my horse out while I'm riding him. I can take him off, put him on the cross ties, and then I can let him stand in his stall and not worry that he's going to shake and the cooler is going to end up underneath his feet and then he's going to rip through it and ruin it like he does everything else. And so it's nice to be able to kind of leave him there, let him know he's going to be all right, and that it'll stay in place so that he can cool out while I clean my tack and put it away and get ready to go home. The square cooler has the advantage of offering the most coverage, and so that's really great for horses who are unclipped. So if you have a horse with a full neck of hair, that's a really high friction area when you're riding. He goes around in a frame and he builds up a lot of sweat in his neck and his chest. And having a square cooler will bring that fleece all the way up and around his neck to help wick that moisture and that heat away from his neck so that he can dry more completely and more quickly for you. So that's coolers. Does anybody have any specific questions about coolers before we move on to other types of blankets? Outstanding. Answered all of the questions before they got asked. So now we're going to move on. Question? There are definitely different blends of fleeces. It really depends on the process that they use to make them. I don't know that much about the performance side of the fleece material, but I mean, if you look through any even human performance catalogs, North Face has their very specific synthetic blends of fleece, and Patagonia does something slightly different. But all fleeces, that's why you're going to see price ranges in terms of, and part of that is going to be brand name as well, but there's definitely higher end, lower end, thicker density, so there is definitely a little bit of variation there, but I can't get quite into the specifics of it. Thank you. Anybody else? Great. So now that we've covered fleeces and coolers and things like that, we're going to go ahead and move on to the general types of horse clothing that people think of when you talk about dressing your horse for the winter. And then people can get a little bit tripped up in terms of what you're talking about and when you're talking about stable sheets versus turnout sheets versus stable blankets versus turnout blankets. So one way that I kind of like to think of it is if you break it down and say, if there's no fill versus fill, and fill is just stuffing, and then there's not waterproof, and then there's waterproof, you can take a look and say if it has no fill, it's called a sheet, and that's across categories. If it has fill, it's called a blanket. And if it's not waterproof, you refer to it as stable. So that makes this one a stable sheet, and this one a stable blanket. However, if it is waterproof, it's called a turnout. And so that makes this a turnout sheet and a turnout blanket. So no fill, not waterproof, stable sheet. No fill, waterproof, turnout sheet. Fill, not waterproof, stable blanket. Fill, waterproof, turnout blanket. One handy way to remember them is think about where he's going to wear it. If it's going to be worn in the stable, it's not waterproof. That's the stable blanket, stays inside. If he's going to wear it in the turnout, it's designed to be waterproof. That's the turnout blanket or sheet, and that can go outside. And so that's a really handy way to remember. I can actually share a story of a fellow SmartPacker who was dressing her horse for the first time ever, and she bought him the most expensive blanket in the store. She thought she was really doing the right thing, and he would come in every day and be soaking wet, and she couldn't figure out why only her horse was wet. And then somebody finally told her that she was turning him out in a stable blanket, and she was really disappointed. So even the best intentions can't make up for knowing exactly what the facts are. So when we're talking about whether it's a stable blanket or a turnout sheet, there are a couple of common terms that people use to classify these pieces of clothing. And they can be things that help you rate them. So the first one is denier. And if you've never heard the word pronounced, you might think it's denier. But it is actually called denier, and it's actually a unit of weight. A lot of people think it's judging the strength of the blanket, and it does a little bit, but very similar to thread count with the sheets on your bed. What it's doing is the unit of weight is describing the fineness or density of that exterior fabric. And what you want to look for is similar to thread count on sheets. The higher it goes, the better quality it is, and also the more expensive it's probably going to be. So something like a 600 denier turnout or a stable blanket is going to be durable enough for most horses who are just kind of generally hanging out, not really causing too much trouble. If you have a horse that goes out with a rowdy pasture mate, you probably want to look more towards 1,000 denier. If you have a horse that's notoriously bad on his blankets and finds every catch in the fence line and tears his blankets open, you probably want to bump up to about 1,200 denier, and that's going to be a really strong fabric for you. Then there are other qualifiers that people use to describe the exterior fabrics, and you can start by looking at what the material actually is. Cotton, even the highest quality cotton, is going to tend to have a lower denier than other fabrics. It's going to tear very easily for you. Anyone who's tried to have their horse go out in a stable sheet can definitely attest to that. You get one rip and it goes all the way down the side. Polyester is going to be a little bit higher end for you. It's going to have a little bit more durability and a little bit more resistance to tears. But definitely the strongest one is going to be a nylon blanket for you. And so the way that that breaks down is you tend to see the more expensive blankets using nylon. If your horse isn't that bad on his blankets, he can easily get by in a 600 denier polyester blanket, and you can save yourself, 80 or 90 bucks. But if your horse does go out with rowdy pasture mates, or he does tend to rip his blankets a little bit more easily, it's worth the investment for you to buy a blanket that's going to be able to stand up to that, as opposed to repurchasing every time. Describing nylon blankets, there are two sort of qualifications that people use in the marketing language around their blankets to try to sell the features to you a little bit more. The first one is ballistic nylon, and as it sounds, ballistic nylon was actually developed for the first round of bulletproof jackets in World War II. And so it's a really, really tight basket weave that is more resistant to punctures than other types of weaves. And so that's something that people will use as a selling feature. So if you see ballistic nylon, you know that it means it's going to be a little bit harder to puncture that blanket. The other one is Ripstop Nylon. And Ripstop is similar to ballistic nylon, describing the type of weave. And what Ripstop has is reinforcements built into the weave, so that if a tear does start, it'll have a cross reinforcer that stops that tear, so it doesn't just tear that blanket open all the way down the side. So those are two terms that you guys can kind of look for as you're doing your shopping around with blankets. We're going to go ahead and jump into the different weights that you'll be looking at when you're shopping for your blankets. So over here we talked about fill versus no fill. determining what is a sheet or a blanket. So we're going to start with a sheet. It has no fill, and that means it has nothing in between the inner and outer layers. And this is an example of a stable sheet. And you can see it's really, really super thin. Sheets aren't designed to provide a ton of warmth. It's a little bit like wearing a windbreaker, like it's just something you want to throw on and keep you warm. And just like those light spring or early fall jackets that you have, you know that they can either be waterproof or not. And so that one is a stable blanket, so that means that it is not waterproof, but you can have turnout sheets that are waterproof. And for maximum confusion, turnout sheets are also referred to sometimes as lightweight turnout blankets, which is really not helpful. So I like to call them turnout sheets and keep the lines pretty clear. So with a sheet, you're probably looking at just a little bit of extra warmth. The other thing that people really like to use stable sheets for is pre-show days, where you want to keep your horse's coat slicked down, you want to make sure that your gray horse doesn't come in green in the morning, that sort of thing. So stable sheets are really helpful for that. And I like to give an approximate temperature guide just to help people kind of have a general idea of where to start when thinking about blanketing their horse. If your horse is body clipped, you're probably going to want to throw a sheet on when the thermometer starts to hit 50 and a little bit lower than that. If your horse isn't body clipped and he has all of his hair, he can probably stay without anything on up to about 40 degrees. But then if he is going to be being turned out, especially if he's going to be being turned out in wet weather, you definitely do want to go ahead and throw a light sheet on to help him retain his own body heat a little bit. That's mostly what sheets do, is prevent his heat from escaping. So then we're going to move on into this category of things with fill. And that can be a stable blanket or a turnout blanket. And within the category of things with fill, there's a wide range. You can have anything from 100 grams of fill all the way up to 400 plus. And the amount of the fill just determines how warm it's going to be for you. So we'll start with the category of medium turnout blankets. And that generally ranges from about 100 to 250 grams of fill. And if your horse is clipped, that's generally good for about 30 to 40 degrees. If he's not clipped, down to 20 to 30 degrees is generally the safe range for a medium turnout blanket. This turnout blanket right here is a medium weight at 220 grams of fill. And so you can see it's still a really nice lightweight blanket for you. It's not too heavy, it's not too bulky, but it does have that fill in there, and the spaces between the fibers and the fill is where his body heat will get trapped and insulate him so that he's protected against the cold a little bit better. Last but not least, we have heavy turnout blankets. And as you guys will notice with this one, it's a lot more of a meaty blanket. It's a little bit harder to fold. You can see that it's got a lot more thickness going on. This has 400 grams of fill, so this is a really serious blanket. And that's really great for if you have a really, really cold winters, a clipped horse. This is going to be 20 to 30 degrees. He can be outside all night in this. If he's unclipped, you can go as far down as 10 to 20. And because we're in New England and because there are definitely parts of the country that are colder than this, if you have winters that tend to get colder than that, you want to start looking at layering. And if you want to layer a blanket, you can throw a fleece under your turnout. You can throw a stable blanket under your turnout. Just something to give that little bit of extra warmth and help trap that heat and insulate a little bit better. So when it comes to shopping for a blanket for your horse, the first thing you need to know, much like shopping for your clothes for yourself, is generally what size. And so to measure your horse for a blanket, you want to start at the center of his chest, and it's like the point right between the 2 points of his shoulders, and you take the end of the tape measure, bring it around in a straight line, all the way around to the point of his buttocks. And the point of the buttocks is a little bit hard to define technically. I like to refer to it as where the cheek meets the tail. And so it's that line where you can really start to see where his tail starts to come in. And you want to keep that tape measure as it comes around from the front of his chest, around down his side, right to the point of the buttocks. That's going to be needing to stay in a straight line. If you get a lot of variation, you're going to order a blanket that's too big. If you're cutting corners, you're going to get a blanket that's too small. And it's probably obvious by the description, but it's really helpful to have a friend help you measure your horse. It's going to be almost impossible for you to do it by yourself. Once you have the measurement, and generally the range for most horses is 69 to about 84, 87 on the bigger end in terms of inches. Ponies are definitely below 69. They can go anywhere down to, you can have a pony in a 48, if it's, so they can go pretty small. But once you know your number, you want to go ahead and try to find a blanket that's going to be about right. Some blankets come in even numbers, some blankets come every 3 inches. Horsewear Ireland measures all of their blankets in 3-inch increments, and so that can be a little bit tough if you're looking for a blanket and you need a 74. They only come 72 or 75, and so that's going to be the sort of thing where you're going to say, okay, I'm going to go up to a 75 and see how it goes. Different brands, just like with people clothing, are going to run a little bit differently in terms of sizing. So some may say order up if you aren't sure, if you're between sizes, that sort of thing. So it's always best to call. If you guys ever have questions about a particular brand of blanket that SmartPak carries, you can call, and our experts do know how our blankets run. The SmartPak blankets run a little bit big. The horsewear blankets tend to run a little bit big too. Baker blankets run very true to size. Weather beaded blankets are fairly true to size as well. So knowing those sorts of things can be helpful. The added bonus and second shameless pitch of the day, SmartPak has free shipping both ways. So we have free returns on sized items. So if you're not sure what size your horse needs, you can order 2 blankets and keep the one that's the better fit. But if you haven't fit a blanket before, knowing what a good fit is can be tough. So what are some things that you want to be looking for? One of the things that I always recommend people do is when you get a new blanket, put it on your horse and ask a friend to walk him around for you. As he's walking back and forth, you can watch how the blanket's shifting and sitting, and because of the material, you can see even from far away where these blankets are wrinkled. It's really easy to see on your horse where it starts to pull. The direction of the light will change, and you'll really be able to see that when his shoulder comes forward, that blanket's pulling more than it should. And so once he walks around a little bit and the blanket's had a chance to settle, throw him a flake of hay on the ground and let him bend down to eat, because that's how he's going to be spending most of his time. Even if he's in a turnout with no grass, he'll keep foraging around until he finds something delicious. And if he's standing in his stall, he's going to have hay in his hay net or hay basket until it falls on the ground, and then he's going to be eating down there. And so that's really important, because when he does have his head down in that natural grazing stance, that tends to put a lot of pressure on the front closure of the blanket, and then also at the withers, right above his shoulders. And so those are 2 places where a lot of pressure points can arise. And so what you want to do is once he's walked around and once he's grazed a little bit and had a chance to settle, you want to check and see how that blanket's feeling, especially in the front. And so some key things to look for is the front closures should be hitting at the point of his shoulder. And so they shouldn't be too low and sagging down, and they shouldn't be too high where it looks like it's choking up on him. If the front closures look good, the sides of the front should lie flat along the slope of his shoulder. If they're gapping out, that blanket's not sitting right and his front closure is probably out of place. If they're pulled back and too tight, you're probably going to be getting a lot of pressure on the withers and the point of the shoulder, and you're going to start to see shoulder rubs. One other spot to check is above the withers. You should be able to comfortably slide a hand from one side up and over the withers to the other. If you can't get your hand in there, there's going to be a lot of pressure and a lot of friction. And if your horse is wearing blankets for 2 or 3 months through the winter, that's going to turn into a really nasty wither rub. So if your horse, one other area that you definitely do want to check is the length. A lot of people think that, much like with people, if you want a blanket, you want the biggest blanket you can find and snuggle yourself all up in it and cozy up on the couch, and that's going to be great. But for your horse, you don't necessarily, more blanket isn't necessarily better. A blanket that's too short and leaves his belly peeking out isn't going to give him any kind of favors in terms of covering him and getting that overall warmth and insulating effect. On the other side, a blanket that's too long means that it probably doesn't fit in a lot of other areas, and you're going to end up with shifting and twisting and bunching, and that's going to cause you a lot of problems down the road. So the ideal spot for the length is when the blanket's on, should end just below the elbow or the point of the stifle when it's sitting over your horse, and you should make sure that it's even on both sides. So once you've got the length all set, there are definitely some problem areas that a lot of people run into. And you've probably guessed that the shoulders and the withers are two of the biggest problem areas. So what can you do? If you have a horse that's prone to wither rubs, a blanket that you can look for is going to be a blanket with a high neck cut. And that's what we've got here. And so you can see that this cut comes a little bit more forward, and there are even blankets with a more dramatic high neck than this. But by having the high neck cut and having that blanket stop forward of the withers, that leaves a lot of room for play in that wither area, as opposed to a blanket that's sitting with a pressure point right across those withers. So if you do have a horse that's prone to wither rubs, high neck blankets are a great option. If you have a horse that's prone to shoulder rubs, there are a couple of different things that you can look for. Horsewear Ireland does a really nice V-front closure on some of their blankets, and so that comes down a little bit like a V-neck on a shirt, where it leaves a little bit more room for him to flex down without causing that pull across the shoulders that can result in that shoulder rub. So that V-neck in the V-front closure is a really nice option. The other thing that you definitely can look for is a blanket with shoulder gussets, and that's what we have here. And these are flaps that are sewn in so that there's extra fabric over that high motion area in the shoulder, and much like pleating on pants or a skirt, what that allows for is a much greater range of motion without causing those friction or pain or pressure points. So those are two things that you can generally look for. Other generalizations, if you have a horse with like a really narrow body type and high withers, so a really traditionally built thoroughbred horse or an Arabian, Weatherbeatas are a great brand for that option, for that body type. The SmartPak line of blankets has also been shown to really fit those horses quite nicely. If you have a much larger bodied horse, really full-bodied warm blood or a draft cross or something like that, Horsewear Ireland styles are really quite nice to fit the big shoulders on those horses and really make sure that they have the room to move and groove in that blanket. If you have a stock build horse, like a paint or a quarter horse, Big D is one of the most long-term, super popular brands, and it's for a reason. It's literally built for these horses. And so that's a really awesome option to look for. And I will also let you guys know we are going to be coming out with a new Rockin' SP line of Western blankets by SmartPak for those stock breed horses. So that's coming up as well. So now that you have your blanket, you've gotten the right fit, it fits your horse, it's great, you want to make sure that you can care for that investment so that it lasts a long time for you. So there are some things that you want to avoid, and some of them are harder than others. In terms of caring for your blanket, it's a little bit of a catch-22, because if you have a waterproof turnout blanket, washing it will actually degrade the waterproof coating, and that will make the blanket lose its waterproofing ability over time. However, if you just let your horse wear it all winter and throw it on the ground, it's going to get full of dirt and ammonia, and the only thing more degrading than laundry detergent is urine. And so if it's just sitting around and it's getting all of those chemicals, those debris that wear and tear, that's not going to be great for the quality of the waterproofing and the exterior fabric either. So if you can't wash it and you can't leave it be dirty, what are your options? What I like to do is take a stiff brush on a turnout blanket, brush out all the dirt and debris and everything like that, and then when it's not in use, I keep it in a stall front storage bag or a tack trunk that's near his stall, just so that it stays up off the ground, clean and dry, and it's not getting all full of everything that's in the barn. If you have a stable blanket or a stable sheet, since those aren't waterproof, they're absolutely fine to just toss them in the laundry, and that's no big deal. One other caveat is Horsewear Ireland's Rhino line, and we have an example right here. This is a SmartPak exclusive pattern. is really unique because they have what they call a barrier technology. And so instead of making the exterior fabric waterproof, there's actually a membrane that lives under this exterior fabric that fully waterproofs the blanket. And so this blanket is an option for something that if you wanted to launder your blankets regularly and you really didn't want to have that kind of funky blanket smell, you could definitely get any of the Rhino line blankets with that barrier technology, and you can wash those just as you would a stable blanket or a stable sheet. So that's blanket care. There are a couple other, kind of smart tips that I like to throw around. As far as waterproofing is concerned, a lot of people like to embroider their blankets and sheets because if you're at a barn and everybody's look the same and you really want to make sure that yours stays with your horse, you can get your name embroidered on the side of it. And on fleeces and stable sheets and blankets, that's a really great thing to do. It really adds a touch of class. It's really fun. You can make it personal. But on the waterproof blankets, once the first stitch of that embroidery pierces the membrane, it's no longer waterproof in that area. And so a lot of people, with the right intentions, embroider their waterproof blanket, and their horse comes in and has a big wet spot every time he goes out in the rain. So if you really do want to monogram or embroider your turnout blanket, I always recommend doing it on the surcingle. And SmartPak does offer that so that we can embroider your full name, your horse's name, whatever you want there. And that way, you don't have to worry about the waterproofing being compromised, and you can still have that added benefit of the embroidery. Another thing that's helpful in terms of keeping track of your blankets and also helping your barn staff manage the blanket situation. As we were talking before about the difference between light, medium, and heavy and the weight range or the temperature ranges that you're looking for there, it can be really hard for the barn staff to know. You don't want to have a flow chart on the outside of his stall that says, if it's 38 degrees, he wears the pink one, but if it's 22 degrees, you got to put that blue one on. That can be a little bit tough for the barn staff, and if they've got 30 horses in the barn and they're all wearing different layers of blankets and some of them aren't clipped, so their blanket situation is different than the horses that are clipped, that can be a real challenge. So one of the great tips that I got from a fellow smart packer is using the brass tags that you can get for a dog's collar or like a bridle tag. And if you embroider or you engrave your horse's name on one side of the tag, you can engrave the temperature range on the other side. So you can say, this is for Cody when it's 20 to 30 degrees. And so that way they look at the forecast, they know what the temperature is going to be, they grab the blanket, throw it on, and no one's confused. So that's a really awesome option that I love to recommend to everybody. And last but not least, it wouldn't be a talk from SmartPak if I didn't mention supplements. With winter coming up, and if you're going to be body clipping your horse, if you're going to be throwing a blanket on, that can be really tough for his skin and his coat. You know, when we're talking about shoulder rubs and wither rubs, that's just friction on your horse's skin that causes a break. And so supporting your horse with a skin and coat supplement, something that has omega-3 and 6 fatty acids, connective tissue support, is really great to help keep that skin nice and healthy. And a skin and coat supplement will also help him grow a nice coat, especially if you've body clipped him. You all know what those sort of like mousy early spring coats look like. It's not really a great look for any horse. So a skin and coat supplement will help your spring coat grow in beautifully and will also support the resiliency of your horse's skin through the winter. So that was all I had for you guys today. If you guys want to come up and touch and feel the blankets, I see we have a question in the back. Sure, Eurocut blankets do tend to be like along the lines of the horsewear blankets, a little bit more of a higher neck. They also have the leg arches that give a little bit more flexibility there through the elbow area on the front legs, but it's not a significant difference, and especially as blankets are getting more generalized. The Eurocut tends to refer now to what most people think of as an English style turnout blanket. The big difference that you're seeing there is it's not going to be that cut back style of the Big D blanket that you see with a really far set back neckline. So it's got a little bit more forward coverage and a little bit more fullness through the shoulder. No, it should absolutely be the same size ranges, yeah.
My horse looks outside all the time and I don't feel her fur.
You know, your horse will really tell you when she needs a blanket. If she's outside and she seems happy, she's probably fine. You know, I mean, wild horses definitely don't wear blankets. The blanketing really starts to play a role when you are modifying your horse's behavior, either by keeping her indoors so she's not growing as much of a blanket as of a coat as she would, or by body clipping her, or by keeping her under all-season lights. That's another way that people can stunt the growth, intentionally stunt the growth of their horse's blankets, is because the horse grows a coat off of the sun changes. And so when the days get shorter, horses know to grow their coats longer and keep themselves warm. So if you're not doing any of those things that are going to alter her natural coat behavior, she might never need to wear a blanket. If she's out there and she's cold and you go out and she's standing and she's shivering and you feel the tips of her ears and they're very, very cold, you probably do want to start throwing on a turnout sheet at that point. And once you do put on a turnout sheet, I would say probably every 10 to 15 degrees it drops. You want to move up to a medium and then a heavyweight.
How much does wearing a blanket help when you're trying to recondition a rescue horse? I've got a thoroughbred that I just took in and was very thin.
Sure.
But I don't know, she wasn't blanketed before. My others were not blanketed, but I don't know if it would help her to be able to get some weight on her.
Sure. So the question was, how much can blanketing help if you have a reconditioning rescue horse? So you're trying to help a horse come back and put weight back on and all those sorts of things. And that's definitely going to be a place where, unlike her horse, who's probably perfectly happy to be standing outside without a blanket on, she's happy, she's healthy, she's young, a rescue horse or a senior horse or a horse with a compromised digestive or immune system is going to have a lot more trouble with thermal regulation, maintaining his own body temperature. If he's 450 pounds underweight, he doesn't have enough body fat to keep himself warm. And so that's definitely going to be the sort of instance where you're going to want to work with your vet and your trainer. You're going to want to keep an eye on the horse as you get to know him. But I would say err on the side of giving him a little bit more blanket in that situation than the general recommendations. I almost always recommend under blanketing. If you're not sure, go lighter, because your horse can probably handle himself in terms of the thermal regulation and keeping his own body heat up. What he can't overcome is if he gets too hot, he sweats under that blanket and then the temperature drops overnight and now he's got to chill. But in your case, that would be one of the situations where I would say, you know, you might want to err on the side of going a little bit heavier because he's not going to have that body fat and that ability to maintain his own heat. One of my favorite topics. So the question was about static electricity. And as if we needed anything else to get our horses more excited in a winter ride when they haven't been turned out for 35 hours and you're like gingerly placing your foot in the stirrup and you're like, okay, he's walking, this is going great. And then you realize you have to take the cooler off. And you start to peel it back and you can hear those static shocks just snapping down his back line. And then off he goes, and so does the cooler, and then so do you. So one of the things that I like to recommend is definitely having, you know, those like bounce dryer sheets are really, really helpful. You can rub it on your horse, you can rub it on the inside of the cooler. I wouldn't be shy about rubbing it on your own breeches or riding pants because you're probably bringing a lot of the static into that situation as well. And then the other option there is, while fleece is really great for helping your horse cool out, fleece is also one of the most staticky fabrics. And so if you do have a horse that's really set off by static and really doesn't like it, warm up with a wool cooler that traps the heat but doesn't have that static effect, and then cool down with a fleece cooler that'll help wick away that moisture, and then you can just peel it off when it is in his stall, and a little bit of static won't kill anyone. Yeah? Yes, so the question was about waterproofing blankets and if you can send it out to get washed. Is it real that they can re-waterproof it, or are they just charging you more? And yes, they can absolutely. There are commercial equine laundry options. We use one of them for the office at SmartPak. We have a couple of days through the winter where we all bring our blankets in and all of the non-riders in the office walk around going, what is that smell? And then they pick up the blankets and they take them away, they wash them, they bring them back. And so they can reapply the waterproofing seal, The other great option is there are detergents, if you wanted to do it at home, that are specifically designed for waterproof blankets. So like the Rambo Blanket Wash is made by Horseware Ireland, and it's specifically designed to be used with waterproof blankets without destroying the waterproofing. It's not going to be the sort of thing that you can wash it once a week, every week, and have it stay waterproof for 10 years, but it is definitely less corrosive than a traditional laundry detergent. You know, I would probably say once a month would be fine, and if you're staying on top of keeping that stiff brush on it, keeping it folded, keeping it nice. But definitely if he goes out and comes back in looking like a swamp thing, I wouldn't be afraid to take it home and wash it. Sure. Question in the back? Yep. So I think your question is this going to be an okay option if your horse is walking in and out of his stall? With a blanket over it, absolutely. This will help. So that is a great option if you have a horse that's, you know, kind of working in a couple of different temperature zones, or he's going inside and outside. If you wanted to layer up, this would be a great first layer. Fleece is always a good option because it'll wick that moisture away from the skin if he gets a little bit warm. And then the exterior turnout blanket will still keep him dry. And this has the front buckle and the surcingle. It only has one belly surcingle and it doesn't have leg straps. So this isn't the most stable. I probably wouldn't turn a horse out in a 40-acre pasture with it because it's going to start to shift, especially over his hips and his haunches. And it can kind of spin underneath, and that's not what you want. But there are definitely blankets out there. Horseware makes an interchangeable liner system that's pretty fancy. So you have this exterior shell, and then you can have 100, 200, 300 degrees of fill on that interchangeable liner. And so it's up to you to say, okay, well, he can either wear just the shell by itself, which at that point is then just a turnout sheet because it has no fill, but it's still waterproof. Or you can add the 100-gram liner if it's a little bit chilly, or if it's super cold, throw on that 300-gram liner with that waterproof exterior. Is a really nice option. And that one attaches securely to the blanket in several spots, so you get that layering benefit without the worry about that shifting. Yeah? So the question is there a difference between a sheet and a raincoat? And so basically the way that I like to describe it is, for people, it's the difference between my rain jacket, that's a sheet, versus a poncho, and that's a rain sheet, or raincoat. And so rain sheets or raincoats tend to look more like a square cooler, where it just is like this big tent of fabric that you just, kind of just throw over the horse and he's covered. And that's really great if you're going out for a horse show day and you're showing either in an outdoor or you're showing in an indoor, but you're stabled about 5 miles away from the indoor ring. And so it's raining, and so you need to tack your horse up in a stall, you need to get him down to the showgrounds, you've groomed him up, everything's great. But as soon as you step outside, he's going to get rained on, he's going to look mottled, your saddle's going to get rained on, none of that's ideal. So the rain sheet is great there because it'll literally cover his ears to his tail and then down to his knees on both sides. Where that differs from the turnout sheet is that the turnout sheet is fitted and it's more like a piece of athletic apparel. So less coverage, but more security. Yes?
Your horse comes in with your brand new blanket and the mark of Zorro upon the back, it's got this massive grip. What do you like to try and add sort of going out and spending another experience?
Sure. So the question was, your horse comes in from the turnout, and I did like the description. He has the mark of Zorro down the side of the blanket. So he's really clearly gone after it in the field, and he's gone ahead and ripped the blanket wide open for you. So now your turnout blanket is no longer waterproof. Your horse is going to be waterlogged and soaked and wet. What are your options? I mean, obviously, of course, you can buy a new one. They do make commercial patching kits. So Horseware has a great one that they will have basically a piece of waterproof, kind of like a rubberized material with an adhering cement. And so if the tear is pretty small, you can go ahead and patch it up with that. And it is going to look a little bit like a patchwork quilt, but I think that we're all more than used to making do in the barn when it comes to saving a little bit of money. And I will thank you for shameless plug number 3. This blanket over here is actually SmartPak's new ultimate turnout blanket, and it does come with a 10-year indestructible guarantee. And so if any time in 10 years that your horse is wearing this blanket and he tears it, you send it back, we'll send you a new one, no questions asked. There are other blankets that do have 2 and 3 year guarantees. Riders International has one, Horseware has a couple that have 2 or 3 year guarantees. But that's the first one on the market with 10 years guaranteed. Yeah?
My horse is older and she's had hair. She has no problem growing it. I just want something because she's getting older. Should I do a turnout sheet or a turnout blanket?
It's a great question. So she's describing that her horse is getting a little bit older, and so she's never needed a blanket before, never had a problem with that. Much like the rescue horse case, if it was a horse that could probably live comfortably without a blanket, except for that it's starting to have age or nutritional concerns like the rescue horse was talking about. So in your instance, you can definitely do a turnout sheet, and start there and see how it goes. If you do feel like, and watch your horse, and if you feel like, is it a he or she? She. If you feel like she's not keeping herself warm enough and she starts to look chilly and unhappy, you feel her ears and her ears feel really cold, you can start bumping up to a medium and then see how that goes. And it's really, unfortunately, it is about being adjustable, but I would say that if you went last year and didn't blanket her at all, definitely start with a turnout sheet, which is the same thing as a lightweight turnout blanket, unfortunately.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I work draft horses in the winter, and so they come in completely soaking wet. And it's winter, and they're in the barn at night. But do you recommend fleece or wool? Is either one of them better for wicking?
Great. So the question was, she works with draft horses who have obviously more than enough hair to keep themselves happy and cozy outside, even in the worst winter weather. But when they do come into the barn at night and they're stabled all night, they're soaking wet. And so if they come in soaking wet, you don't necessarily want to let them just spend the whole night standing in their stall all wet. So between fleece and wool, my big preference in the winter is for fleece, because wool is really great at absorbing, but it's not great at drying quickly. And so it absorbs that moisture and then just holds it there on their backs. And so that's not the most ideal thing, especially if you're leaving it on a long time. If you throw a fleece on, that'll pull the moisture out of their hair and then out to the outside of the fleece where it'll evaporate away. Sure. Yes?
We have a pony that tends to have a really thick coat.
Uh-huh.
And it's the debate of leaving him unblanketed or the feeling of it's raining and his coat is now wet and is he going to be chilled from that? The whole idea of blanketing and having the coat get smooshed down,
Yep.
or having it stand up and do what it's supposed to do.
Yep.
So that debate of
It's a great question.
non-blanket.
So her question is, her pony grows a very healthy coat and keeps itself warm. He puffs out, has plenty of hair to go around, but should she let him just take care of himself in terms of puffing out that winter coat, or should she go ahead and throw a blanket on? And she brought up a great point, that if you do have a horse with a natural coat and you put a blanket on, that blanket, the weight of the blanket is going to compress that coat. And what your horse's natural hair coat does, if he does grow a thick, full winter coat, is it acts the same as the fill in the blanket. The space between the hairs traps air so that his entire coat acts like a little halo of insulation around him. If he's not having trouble getting through the winter and he doesn't look unhappy when it's raining, and if you gave him a run-in shed and he doesn't go in it, probably doesn't need a blanket.
Are you familiar at all with the blanket? I just heard about it this week. It has some sort of pieces on it that's supposed to allow the hair to stand up.
I have never heard of that.
Yeah, I just recently, someone mentioned it to me, and they said they're going to send me the link about it.
That sounds exciting.
I know.
If you get a link about it, email it to customer care at SmartPak and we'll check it out. Thank you. Oh, she was asking about, there's a blanket that she just recently heard about that has something in the way that the blanket is structured that actually helps the blanket stand up off the horse's coat. I don't know how that would work. I can only imagine what it looks like, but I would definitely be interested to check it out. So, yes. The ears are a great place to check because they are one of the extremities, and so if you see a horse that has survived a really hard winter outside, so if it's something in like northern Canada and a horse went through a really rough winter, you will see frostbite on the ears, and it gets like a very, almost like a calcification. Their ears get really hard, they get a lot of lumps and bumps, and it's really unattractive. It's not bad for the horse at all, except for that they obviously were cold enough that they did get frostbite there and that tissues died. Doesn't change the horse's soundness, health, or anything like that. But so that is the indicator that tends to be the first place that the body stops sending heat if it's too cold to manage its own heat. And so the extremities, it's just like with people when you get gangrene on fingers and toes. If you get too cold in the winter, so the ears are a great place to check. If you feel the tips of the ears and they're really, really cold and you just seem like maybe he's not doing the best job keeping himself warm, you can throw a blanket on. But the other thing is you can definitely really watch your horse, and they'll tell you how they're feeling. There are some horses that could have the nicest 14 by 14 heavily bedded stall in the world, and they will march outside the minute it starts snowing, and they just want to be out there. So that horse probably doesn't need blankets. Seems pretty happy. Thanks again for attending. We hope you enjoyed the presentation. Once again, we'll be posting answers to all the questions we missed, along with a full version of the video later this week. If you have specific questions about your individual horse, don't hesitate to contact our experts at 1-888-752-5171 or email customercare@smartpak.com. They're all riders, and they're always happy to help. Thanks for joining us, and have a great ride.